Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by his toe. Who got killed? We don't know. If it's Daryl, I'll hate this show. Seriously, please don't kill Daryl. Disclaimer. Spoilers and stuff. Catch yourself up on the Walking Dead show and/or comics. Or don't. Whatever. Season 6 of The Walking Dead was one heck of a tense season, with barely any major character deaths, which everyone felt was building up to something. From Glenn's multiple death teases to Daryl blowing up saviors with an RPG, Season 6 was certainly one of the better seasons. Well, anything's better than Season 2. Recently, I was in a discussion with a friend of mine about The Walking Dead Season 6 finale, which ended on a devastating cliffhanger in which our new main villain, Negan, gives one of our beloved characters a date with Lucille. It honestly seemed like a bit of a cop-out ending to the season, with not even the cast knowing who dies. Regardless of that, it had to be someone, and it could have been anyone. So today, I'll be giving you your Walking Dead fix during Walker withdrawals by presenting the evidence about who was at the other end of Lucille. So before we do anything, we have to know the order very well. Assuming you're facing Negan, left to right, the order is Eugene, Carl, Aaron, Sasha, Rick, Maggie, Abraham, Michonne, Daryl, Rosita, and Glenn in a semicircle. Anyone else find it a little bit sad that while writing the script for this, I knew the order by heart? No, just me. Anyways, this is important because we can use the first-person camera angle of the person being killed, as well as the way Negan looks around at the group to figure out who it was getting the bat. So now we can start to rule out certain characters. For the more obvious, it's not Rick or Carl. It can't be Rick because he's the main character of the show, but if that's not evidence enough, Negan says,
"Anybody moves, anybody says anything, cut the boy's other eye out and feed it to his father."
Which wouldn't make any sense for him to say if he was going to completely deform and kill either one of them, so they're safe. We can also rule out Sasha, Maggie, Michonne, and Rosita because it is revealed in the comics that Negan doesn't kill women. And even if the showrunners went against this aspect of Negan, it still can't be Maggie because she's pregnant, and they certainly wouldn't do something so controversial on one of the most popular shows on television. Anyways, the Grimes family and the women are safe, which leaves us with Eugene, Aaron, Abraham, Daryl, and Glenn. This is where it starts to get a little more ambiguous, so we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. To figure this out, we're going to have to look at each character's development arcs over the past season, because they never kill off a character if they're currently going through a development arc. Only once they figure themselves out, does somebody die. Ah yes, the cruel irony of The Walking Dead. Let's start with Eugene. Eugene went through a lot of change and essentially grew a pair this season. He patched things up with Abraham, took a bullet for him, and even bit Dwight's crotch to save his friends. Now that's really grown a pair, am I right? Also in the Season 6 finale, Eugene is finally accepted by the rest of the group as just as important as everyone else. His whole arc over his time on the show revolved around becoming more independent, which he demonstrates in multiple things he does throughout the season.
Dibs is dibs.
Needless to say that Eugene's arc is basically over right now, so he's still at risk, right? Wrong. If we look at how Negan looks at everyone in the first person scene, we can tell that the person is to the right of Rick, as when he says the line about Carl's eye, he slightly gestures to his right, which is Rick's left, meaning that Negan's victim is not to the left of Rick. This rules out Eugene as well as Aaron, who didn't really have anything going for him this season anyways. We are now left with 3 potential dates for Lucille: Daryl, Abraham, and Glenn. Let's start with Daryl, as he's the easiest to rule out of the 3. Daryl is currently suffering from a gunshot wound, which leaves him quite weak and vulnerable at the moment. As we see in the execution, whoever it is fighting back, which Daryl is too tired and weak to do. Also, Daryl has an unresolved plotline in his conflict with Dwight and trying to avenge Denise, so they wouldn't kill Daryl and leave Dwight alive for his eventual death to be someone less significant. Every time an enemy is killed on the show, it's always by someone who had a personal hatred for them, like how Michonne was the one to kill the governor, and how Rick was the one to kill Gareth. It'll likely be Daryl who kills Dwight, so that rules out Daryl as safe. And then there were 2, Abraham and Glenn. There was a lot, and I mean a lot, of evidence for either of these characters being the one to die. Let's start with Abe. Abraham has been getting a lot more screen time this season, with him being one of the main people to figure himself out. Abraham went from being confused about what he wanted in life, questioning whether or not he wanted to die, but then came around and was inspired to start a family like Glenn and Maggie. This means that he currently has nothing going on as far as character development goes, so he's at risk of getting the bat. In addition to this, Abraham is already dead by this point in the comics. In the show, however, they killed off Denise instead of Abraham, meaning that Abe is overdue for a death. It's also worthy of pointing out how when Negan looked at Abraham, Abe just looked at him, ready to take a hit, ready to die even. Abe has shown over the course of the show that he's willing to die for his friends, and as we see in the first person view, whoever it is fighting back, but yet again, if it is Abe, perhaps he's just strong enough to take a few hits. Now onto the elephant in the room, Glenn. Glenn has evaded death twice this season, and some of us thought that he was actually dead for a short time, which honestly would be more surprising if it weren't for videos like these. Anyways, Glenn low-key has a lot going on right now. His wife is pregnant for one, and for another, he recently killed his first person, which has put a lot of pressure on him. He didn't really have much of a character arc in Season 6, which puts him at risk of Lucille. However, Glenn still has a lot against him. Let's start with the most obvious thing, being Glenn's death in the comics at the hand of Lucille. The scene where Negan is introduced is also Glenn's death in issue 100 of the comics. Considering the show has been doing a lot of comic book stuff lately, then it would make a lot of sense if it was Glenn. Another thing in the show that points to Glenn's possible death is his relationship with Enid. Enid was introduced in Season 5 as a mysterious orphan and was expanded upon a bit in Season 6. When Glenn comes out from under the dumpster, Enid is the first to find him, and they help each other out. They have this father-daughter relationship, which just adds to the amount of people Glenn cares about, which is never really a good sign in this show. Enid and Maggie also seem to have a mother-daughter relationship, which seems to suggest that Enid is going to be the show's counterpart to Sophia in the comics, who Glenn and Maggie adopt. This is very important because if they kill off Glenn, then they'd likely use his death to shape Enid, which is something they've barely done this season. With all that said, it's still down to Glenn and Abe, and after showing you all this evidence, I've concluded that the one to meet a gruesome fate by Lucille is... Glenn. As sad as I am to say it, Glenn is the most likely person to be killed by Negan. If you don't believe the evidence I've already given, then consider this. Look at how Glenn reacts when Negan talks to Maggie. He clearly wants to fight off the saviors to save her, and attempts to break out of his hand ties to do so. If he was willing to do that, or he didn't know whether or not they'd kill him on sight, then he'd certainly fight back when Negan hits him with Lucille. Glenn is the type of character who is hopeful, always holding out for hope that there's some way the situation could work out, and isn't the type to give up. If anyone would try to take a few hits, it'd definitely be Glenn. Also, if we look to the earlier first-person scenes in the episode, we see that whoever's point of view it is was in the back of the truck, and the characters in there were Rosita, Michonne, Daryl, and Glenn. The Walking Dead has a tradition of using imagery like this to hint at upcoming things, like how in Tyrese's death episode, it shows all this imagery that happens to be things that Tyrese saw on the way back from Noah's community. Glenn has also demonstrated that he's not afraid to die. Telling Enid who he'd die for, distracting her to walkers to potentially kill him just to save Maggie, he doesn't care about if he dies to save others. This, combined with the evidence of Glenn's relationship with Enid and his death in the comics, makes a solid case towards the likelihood of Glenn's death. Now, I'm not saying that Glenn's death in the show is set in stone. The show could throw a total curveball and kill off someone else, but this is just my 2 cents. So many people are making false evidence of sound clips from the episode which aren't real and are just deceiving people, so I figured I'd give the hard facts as to who was actually likely to die. As much as I or anyone don't want Glenn to die, it's just something we're gonna have to accept as people who watch a show that's literally about death. But hey, that's just a theory. A theory of a dead man. Thanks for watching. Coral! We gotta like and subscribe, Coral! Gotta support the channel, Coral! Someone shot your eye, Coral! I hate the sound the like button makes, Coral! That's it. That's the best Rick impression I got.